Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Startup Visa, International Entrepreneurial Parole, presented by Alcorn Immigration Law and Early Growth Financial Services. My name is Jason Kennedy from EGFS. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get started. The webinar will last approximately 60 minutes with some time for Q&A built in as well, both throughout the presentation and, of course, at the end as needed. There will be contact information at the end of the presentation, so if you need to do any follow-up, get questions answered, please feel free to reach out via the information at the end. Finally, for questions, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, use the questions section within your GoToWebinar panel. We will see those questions and we will get through as many of those as possible. And of course, as always, a recording will be made available and emailed out via email through GoToWebinar and of course on our YouTube channel. That will be within 48 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Sophie Alcorn from Alcorn Immigration Law. Sophie, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's a pleasure to be with Early Growth Financial Services again, doing this webinar. And just so everybody knows, Early Growth is a fantastic place for your outsourced accounting and tax needs if you have an early stage startup anywhere in the United States. They're awesome. So I'm super excited to be here today. We are talking about startups and something new technically called International Entrepreneur Parole. I nickname it the Startup Visa because that's a lot easier to talk about. And I want to promise to all of you guys who are listening and watching and viewing this later on the web and to you, Jason, that I'm going to do everything in my power to make this worthwhile for all of you today. So at the end of this webinar, you'll have a clear path forward and action steps that you can take to move forward with your immigration status based on your startup. And so, a lot of people are often surprised to learn that you actually, as a foreigner in the United States, have immigration options at your disposal so that you can get visas and green cards and other types of immigration status in the United States. So it's a wonderful thing because you guys create the innovation that is moving the American economy forward and providing jobs to Americans. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. And so I'm pretty excited to tell you about some of your options for how you can get that done. So we'll be covering three main things today. First, we will be talking about the new program, International Entrepreneur Parole, which is a new immigration status that might take effect this summer that Obama created. And hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, the current administration will allow this plan to move forward in July. We will also be talking about something that already exists, which is a special green card option for foreign founders who have had success in entrepreneurialism. And then I'll also be running through a few of the other standard options for, up until this point, how startup founders can get an immigration status through your startup. So I hope this is useful to you, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this information with you because I think, a lot of my clients, our clients at Alcorn Immigration Law, come to us and they're super scared, stressed, freaked out. They feel marginalized. They're just really worried about their future in the United States. And it's not just for themselves and their own professional goals and financial goals, but also because of their families, because of the investors that are counting on them to be able to stay here legally and grow their companies. So this is high stakes stuff, but our clients have found that working with us and our team gives them, success at obtaining immigration benefits efficiently, and they really appreciate the warmth and attention that our legal team devote to helping them. So I'd like to tell you a little bit more about myself and our firm and our team before we get started. This is me. My name is Sophie Alcorn. I'm an immigration lawyer. I founded Alcorn Immigration Law 2 years ago in Mountain View, California, which is in Silicon Valley. And although we are in California and I'm licensed to practice in California, our team of attorneys can help immigrants who are living in any part of the United States or who are in any country around the world who want to move to the United States. And what we stand for is immigration for innovation. We stand against, petty, small-minded thinking and settling for the status quo, and we stand for diversity and how that leads to new ideas that can make the world a better place. And so why do I care about this? Well, these are my parents at their wedding in the early 80s in Germany. My dad, during his lifetime, was an immigration lawyer who inspired me to do this work, and my mom is an immigrant from Germany. So I feel this very deeply. And growing up, my sister and I really admired our dad for the work that he did, and he would always come home and tell us war stories about fighting the government, David versus Goliath, and all the amazing scientists and business people and engineers and inventors from around the world who he got to help. And I also do this work because I can really relate to my clients. I understand what it's like to be an outsider, to feel afraid, worried, rejected, outcast, ashamed. Look at my body language, like closing up as I talk about these things. It's so uncomfortable. But I know what it's like to feel trapped and voiceless. And I don't ever want my clients to feel that way. And I want you to know that you don't have to. And, immigration really causes innovation. The top unicorns in Silicon Valley have immigrants on their founding teams, have immigrants on their boards, have immigrant investors. And there's this misconception that startups are only hiring foreign-born people, but that's actually not true. They're a huge source of new jobs for Americans as well. So it's really important to the country. As I'm sure many of you guys have families who are depending on you, so do I. Those are my kids. And I started Alcorn Immigration Law in Mountain View 2 years ago. And we help clients. This is at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in Santa Clara. My client had an interview that we got approved. We work a lot in the local startup ecosystem with a lot of companies, employees of Google and Facebook, but also tons of startups. This was me at Startup Grind. I had my I'm an immigration lawyer, ask me questions shirt, but a lot fewer people talk to me about Startup Grind than any of the previous ones. We also do a lot of work internationally. This was when I went to India. This was in Kerala in December. I was on the news talking about investment opportunities and green card opportunities in the United States on the news there. And then, and I understand also, I empathize with you as my clients, as entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur too. This was a couple months ago. I won the award for Outstanding Young Business Person in Mountain View for founding my law firm. So that was exciting. But the team has grown quickly. We have over 10, including 7 on staff in the office every day. We have Irene, our office manager, Salila, our Southeast Asia director, Aline, our supervising paralegal, Mary, one of our associates, me. We have other people as well, and we also have a little dog who comes to visit us and help us with our cases sometimes with the massive amounts of paperwork that need to happen. As much as we've tried to be digital, the fact is that the government only accepts paper. So, some of these application packages that we create for our clients are easily 200 to 500 pages long of the, because there's not only the 20 pages of forms that you need to fill out, but we also write an extensive cover letter explaining why our clients qualify for whatever immigration status they want. And then there's hundreds of pages of supporting documentation to prove that everything is valid and justified and that our clients really deserve the immigration status that they're looking for. We've had many startup clients, many individual clients, both locally in Silicon Valley and all across the country. Some are subsidiaries of foreign countries. And we love helping them and helping you. So let's delve into the topic, how to get to Silicon Valley, how to be able to stay in the United States to build your startup legally and with permission to work, and so that you're not doing any crazy workarounds. I mean, I hear a lot of stories about people trying to circumvent the rules in ways that are not legitimate, and that really concerns me because you're putting yourself at risk, you're putting your company at risk, you're putting your investors' money at risk. There's a lot at stake here that depends on you being able to have the peace of mind that you can stay in the United States legally to work at your company and build your company. So, I apologize, that slide didn't generate properly. Essentially, the typical immigration process is that if you're from another country, you might come here on a non-immigrant status, like a B1, B2 visitor visa, or the ESTA 90-day visa waiver program, where you don't need a visa, you just get to visit, or an H-1B visa that a company sponsored you for. So those are all non-immigrant statuses, and then you might have the option of becoming a permanent resident and getting a green card, either from another country or while you're already here, going through the adjustment of status process to becoming a permanent resident here. And so something to note is that all of those things signify the same concept. A green card is the same thing as permanent residence, and you get it through adjustment of status. And basically, when you have it, you're allowed to live in the United States for the rest of your life, unless you do something bad and get deported. But then you also are on the road to becoming a citizen. So we're going to be talking today about international entrepreneur parole. And as we're delving into that, I'll just put it out there that if you do have questions, you're welcome to type them, and Jason will interject as appropriate to sprinkle those in, and I'll be happy to answer your questions as we go through the material. But just to survey the landscape of what are the current options for startup founders, there are several I would like to mention. It's not the focus of today's call. There's a previous webinar from a couple months ago that Alcorn Immigration Law that we did in conjunction with Early Growth Financial Services. And that's a broad level survey overview of all the options in much more detail. And that's available on the Early Growth YouTube channel. So you're welcome to watch that and check that out and see what might be appropriate for you. But some of the main visa types that we have helped startup founders get to be able to run their companies include something called an E2 visa for investors, which is typically somebody is investing $60,000 to $200,000 of their own personal money into a new company, and they're coming from a specific set of countries, not including China or India, and they can stay temporarily to build their company as an investor. We also do a lot of L visas for companies that have subsidiaries or affiliated companies in other countries. So, for example, an Indian startup that's been doing business in India for more than a year, now they're going to open their Silicon Valley sales and marketing office, and the CEO wants to transfer here as an executive, moving between branches of the company. We can do that as well. For people who are already on H-1B because you've been sponsored by another employer, we have been successful getting H-1B visas for startup founders to be employed at their startup that they own. The same can apply for people who have extraordinary ability, who might qualify for an O visa. And then there's a couple of other H-1B related programs to mention. One of them is called Unshackled, and that's a program that allows, it's kind of like will hold the H-1B as the employer and employ you to work at your startup. And then another one that's new and really cool here in Silicon Valley and also across the country is something called the Global Entrepreneur in Residence Program, where basically a university is hiring you to be a business mentor, an entrepreneurship mentor to the students on a part-time basis at the university. And so they can sponsor you for a new H-1B that doesn't have to go through the lottery process. And then once you have that, you can get basically additional permission to work at your own startup for the rest of the time. So if you'd like information about any of those options or anything else, I'm happy to share that with you. I'll be providing information about how you can get in touch with us at the end of this webinar, and then you can also check out the recording of the past webinar that goes into all of those, plus more, in a lot more detail on the Early Growth Financial Services YouTube channel. So with that, International Entrepreneur Parole. So what is this? Where did it come from? Why is it here? Is it really happening? Those are all, there's some of the questions that I will be answering for you guys throughout the next part of this webinar. So this program came about during the Obama presidential administration. Over several years, he had a task force about foreign entrepreneurship that did workshops and kind of like think tank groups throughout Silicon Valley to talk to founders and other people in the startup ecosystem about what are the needs of foreign founders, how are your efforts to get normal visas challenged by the form of your business and the existing legal framework, and what could the government do to make it easier to spur entrepreneurship and innovation. And so the result of this was last year in 2016, towards the end of the administration, USCIS, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they're the folks who are inside the United States, and they decide immigration applications for people who are already inside the country. They created some proposed regulations about something called the International Entrepreneur Rule, which is a rule, a federal agency rule through a rulemaking process that would provide an immigration status called parole to foreign startup founders. And there was a lot of publicity about this last year. I spoke a lot about it. I was in the New York Times talking about it. And through this agency rulemaking process, various things happened. There was a public notice period and comment gathering period where the public got to chime in and talk about suggestions for how they wanted it to be changed, or should it exist, or should it not. And the result of this was that a revised version was published on, I believe it was January 17th, 2017, as this new rule to provide this new immigration status to startup founders. And the way the new rule is written is that the applications will be allowed to be submitted, so the government is willing to receive them at the end of July of 2017. So this was very exciting. It was like President Obama's parting gift to Silicon Valley and startup founders, and it was great. And then 3 days later, January 20th, we got our new president, and one of his first actions was to freeze everything that Obama had done in terms of federal agency rules that were still pending and had not yet been published, and also rules that had been published but had not yet taken effect. So this parole program got put on hold. And then, and also in the early days, in those first days of the administration, the new president took a lot of actions with respect to immigrants, as I'm sure you're all familiar with. And there were also a lot of leaked memos from the administration. And one of them was saying, don't let anybody in, cancel every strange program where the author of this memo asserted that it went beyond the scope of the president's rulemaking authority. And don't do anything special for Silicon Valley and startup founders. It's a special interest group, and they don't deserve to have any special favors done for them. So that was where this memo was coming from, and we were all really concerned about what it meant and what would happen, but it was actually never signed. So, and there's been a whole lot of silence on the issue from the administration, which I think is actually a really good sign that I think it will go into effect in July. So I'm looking forward to that, and it's just really important because there's so much pain in the immigration process. There's like lack of certainty. How can you build your company? How can you get investment? How can you earn money and pay for your food and your place to live? How do you put down roots? How can you provide assurance to your family that you're going to be okay and you're going to be able to take care of them? How do you plan for the future? Are you going to be deported back to your country? I mean, can you imagine how many, this feeling of hollowness and desperation that so many startup founders feel because the current legal framework just isn't sufficient to meet all these needs, even though we do find a lot of creative legal strategies to help our clients. So let's talk about the legal nitty-gritty of this program and how it's written so you can figure out if you might qualify when it takes effect. So the first key term is entrepreneur. So how does the rule define entrepreneur? Well, it says that an entrepreneur is an alien, so that's not ET, it's a person born in another country, which is such a mean word to use. But anyway, somebody born in another country who possesses a substantial ownership interest in a startup and who has a central and active role in the operations of the entity, such that you, the startup founder, are well positioned because of your knowledge, skills, or experience to substantially assist the entity with the growth and success of the business. And, okay, so let's break that down. You have to own a substantial amount of the company. You have to have a central and active role in running the company. And based on your knowledge, skills, or experience, you have to be in a good position to do so. And what you're going to help with is the growth and the success of the business. So if we break that down even further, a substantial ownership interest means you have to own at least 10% of your company at the beginning of this International Entrepreneur Parole program. And then later on, it is possible for people to get renewals 2.5 years later. So at that time, you have to still have a substantial ownership interest, but the percentage changes, and for the renewal, you only have to own 5% of the company. So okay, and then another thing to note is that if you're like buying and selling equity or shares, the whole time during the first chunk, during the first 2.5 years, you have to own at least 5% the whole time when you have that initial parole period. Okay, so that is who is an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur if you own at least 10% of the company, you're central in running it, you're well positioned to do so, and you're going to help with the growth and the success of your business, and you're born in a foreign country. Okay. So,
Sophie, we got a question that came in around that, and
okay,
maybe we'll see if you've heard this term. Question is, in that case, is indirect ownership okay? Have you heard of that term or familiar with that kind of scenario?
Tell me what that scenario would look like, if you know,
okay.
Or if the question writer could provide some more information about that, please.
Yeah, no problem. I'll tell you what, we can kind of jump into the next slide here, and then okay. I'll work with the question asked here, and we'll come back.
Next, and then I can let you know. My gut instinct is no, but tell me more. Okay.
Oh, here we go. That was a quick turnaround, yeah. Actually. Well done. They own a parent subsidiary that owns the main company, which that sounds backwards. So they own so it sounds like they're in ownership of a parent company. Would they be able to apply for this under the subsidiary, or apply the subsidiary to their application? Like, what, have you ever seen anything kind of like that?
Thank you for exposing the first legal gray area of this whole program. I don't think that's contemplated in the regulations. So we should talk, because there might also be other visa options at your disposal that might even be better than this. So that is definitely one of the first, that's exciting for me as a lawyer technician to see the first interesting variation. But no, I have not read, there's no pre-contemplated, there's nothing about that in the regulations that I've seen yet that contemplates that situation directly. But we can help you, I'm sure. So,
okay, we got another question that came in the meantime, and just some clarity around the ownership minimum requirement of that. It's 10%, and you mentioned something about the first 2.5 years there. Could you kind of run through that again?
Yeah. So if you're applying for this in July, you need to own at least 10% of your startup in July. After you get approved, you can sell off some of your equity, and then you have to at least own 5% while you have this status. And
Okay, so is that during the application process only, or once you've been granted the visa? Like, how long do you have to be sitting on that 10%?
Yeah, during the application process, you have to own 10%. And then after it gets approved, you can drop down to at least 5%, which you need to maintain throughout the time that you have this status and continue to have if you're applying for an extension 2.5 years down the road.
Gotcha. Okay, so 10% up front and then maintain at least 5 from there on. Gotcha. Okay, great. Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. So what is a startup entity? What is a startup? So it must have been recently formed, and it must be doing business lawfully and legally. And it also must have, they call it, substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation. So, okay, what does it mean to be recently formed? This means the startup must have been founded within the last 5 years before you apply for the immigration status. And for most of you, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Most startups can go through an entire life cycle and much less than that. So if you're on this call, your company was probably less than 5 years old. Okay. And yeah, and then this other key term is substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation. And we'll be getting into that more in a little bit. Okay. So how does this program work? Well, you also need to show that you're getting funding. And there's 2 types of funding sources that qualify. One is government money, and the other is money from private investors. Now, probably most of you will have money from private investors, which we'll talk about next, but just really quickly, there are some government grants and awards that could qualify for this. And what they're looking for is money that comes from a government, so a federal, state, or local government entity that regularly funds startups, and it has to be for economic development, research development, or job creation, or some other similar government financial award made to startups specifically. And it does not include having the government or government agency as one of your clients that's buying services from you as a contract. That doesn't count. So it's not about a contract, it's about getting an award or a grant from a government agency. The other funding source that qualifies is money from private investors. So in order for your funding to count for this, the investment must have been made in good faith, and it must not be an attempt to evade or circumvent or work around any limitations in this program. So you have to, in good faith, follow all the rules, and the money has to be legal. No money from fraud, no money from criminal activity, no untraceable money. Has to be clean, legitimate money. And so some common forms that can take that would qualify are, the investor purchasing equity or convertible debt or some other type of security that's convertible into equity that's typical for startups. What it does not include is money from your parents, your wife, your brother, your sister, your kids. So family money investment does not count. And if any of those people own a company that's investing in your startup, that does not count either. So it has to be a good faith investment of clean, legal money, not from your family. Okay. But then who is the investor that actually can make this investment? And there's the definition of who is a qualified investor. And this is different. You may have heard, if you've been looking for funding from angel investor groups, for example, you may have heard of the term accredited investor, which I believe is an IRS tax designation, though I'm not 100% sure about that. But USCIS decided to make their own separate definition for who a qualified investor is. So it's a different process. And a qualified investor is a person who's a U.S. citizen or who has a green card in the United States, or a company in the United States that's legally incorporated in one of the 50 states, that is majority, I'll just read it and then we can break it down. Majority owned and controlled directly and indirectly by U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents of the United States, provided such individual or organization regularly makes substantial investments in startup entities that subsequently exhibit substantial growth in terms of revenue generation or job creation. Okay, let's unpack that. So it's a person or a company. If it's a person, they have to have citizenship or green card. If it's a company, it has to be majority owned by people who are citizens or who have green cards. Not either. The majority ownership must be both directly and indirectly. And now for either the individuals or the companies who are investing in you, they have to regularly make substantial investments in startups. So they need to have a track record of doing this. You're not supposed to be their first project. It's supposed to be legit, Okay. And because their goal needs to be, investing in opportunities for substantial growth and revenue generation and job creation. Okay, now if somebody has gotten into trouble for committing fraud or violating securities laws and regulations, or doing anything related to securities illegally, they do not qualify as your investor for your startup. So just stay away from them. Okay.
So Sophie, real quick question around qualified investors. As investment crowdfunding is starting to take off and becoming an option for some, but not all, early stage companies. Have you run across that yet as it pertains to this particular criteria?
I have. Fantastic question, and I will be addressing that, absolutely. And the answer is yes, there's a way we can include that, even though it's from a crowd, not from an individual qualified investor. So, great question.
Got it. Great.
And now more information about the investor and how you prove that this is their thing that they're doing consistently and that they qualify. So in the last 5 years, they must have made at least $600,000 of investments into startups. And after their investments were made, at least 2 startups must have each created at least 5 jobs or generated at least $500,000 in revenue, with average annualized revenue growth of at least 20%. So they want to make sure that these startup founders are not just saying that this is, not startup founders, angel investors or venture capital firms. You need to show that, this is what they do. They have a track record. They've at least put in $600,000 into companies in the last 5 years, and that these companies, at least 2 companies that they've invested in, have grown as a result. And now another aspect of this whole thing is that you're going to have to show that your company will be creating jobs. And when we're talking about jobs and what qualifies, it has to be a full-time job in the United States that one person works at for at least 1 year. And the person who is the employee who's doing that job has to be a U.S. citizen or a green card holder or somebody else with legal immigration status and work authorization who's not your family member. And it also does not include independent contractors. And it has to be full-time, which means 35 hours a week, and you're not allowed to combine 2 part-time jobs to call it 1 full-time job. Okay, so how do we use all of these definitions? Now that you've heard all of the terms, how do they fit together into the actual requirements that you have to show that you meet to qualify for this parole status? And excuse me, I need a sip of water. I've been talking so long. Okay. And what even is this status? So parole is different from a visa. The legal metaphor is that somebody who has parole, it's like they're standing at the border asking to be allowed to come in. And it comes from the olden days when ships would arrive with immigrants at Ellis Island in New York, and they would be allowed on the island for processing. And when they were there, like if they had a medical emergency and they needed to be transported to a hospital in Manhattan, they were paroled into the United States and allowed to come in temporarily, but legally their status was still as if they were standing at the border on Ellis Island asking to come in. So that's what this status is. It's not really a visa. It's not permanent residence. It's this other thing, but it still allows you to work here and live here and travel. And so the initial parole has an application, which is 15 pages long, and that is just one of many forms that go into this process. And now the criteria that the government is going to consider when they look at your application and what they're going to want to know is, we talked about what is an entrepreneur, how you have to have at least 10%, and you have to be well qualified, and you're actually actively working in your company. So first you have to prove, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. And it's at this startup, which was formed in the last 5 years and has been legally operating in the United States. And so part of what legally operating could mean is, look, we were paying our taxes, and look, we have business licenses, for example. And so then you show the money amount. And so you need to prove that within the last 18 months before the date you're applying for parole, one of these qualified investors put at least $250,000 of clean money into your company. Or within the last 18 months, that one of those government agencies that does awards and grants to fund startups and spur growth has put in at least $100,000 into your company. So $250K for private investors, $100K for government. Now, this is where I answer Jason's question about crowdfunding. And this is exciting. Oh, and here's the rundown. So within the last 18 months, the company received a qualified investment amount of at least $250,000 from qualified investors, or at least $100,000 from qualified government awards or grants. And the alternative criteria are, I'll read it. You can, instead of those financial amounts, you can provide other reliable and compelling evidence of the startup entity's substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation. So what does that mean? My interpretation as a lawyer is if you can show that you've gotten $250,000 of crowdfunding money, that's a pretty good indicator that a lot of people believe that your startup has substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation. If you get $250,000 from a foreign-owned accelerator, incubator, fund, whatever, in the United States that's not owned by a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, I think we can argue that meets the alternative criteria and that you have that your company has substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation. And there's lots of variations. I think it would be hard, since it specifically says, no husband, wife, son, daughter, mother, father are allowed to invest. I think it would be pretty hard to argue that they would meet the alternative criteria. But it's really vague. Anything that says, any evidence that shows that you have substantial potential for rapid growth and job creation could work. So if you were on Shark Tank, maybe we can show that screenshots from that episode or something and use that as evidence. Okay. So that's the financial aspect. And then as I mentioned, the initial period is for 2.5 years. And then after that, you're allowed to request an additional 2.5 years of this status to stay here and to continue building your company. And at that point, you will need to show additional, the bar gets raised. So at that point, you must have raised at least $500,000 of investment, and it created at least, we were talking about the jobs, so at that point is when you show that you've created at least 5 full-time jobs for at least 1 year that people with legal work authorization have been working in. Or you could show that you've reached at least $500,000 of annual revenue with 20% growth during that initial parole period. Or, once again, other substantial evidence. So, yeah, 30 months for the first round, 30-month renewal for the second round. And you're allowed to work at your startup once you get this. And then let's talk about your family. So your spouse and kids can come with you, and I'm really happy that they did it this way, but your spouse can get a work permit, and your spouse can work at any company or any job. So that is really good. Let me see if there are other things I wanted to add about this. Oh, I mean, if there's a material change, like let's say your startup fails and you're no longer working here, you've got to notify the government and your status will end and you'll have to figure out a plan B. They are allowed to cancel your status for any reason. So if they think you've committed fraud, or if the company has any severe legal problems, they could potentially cancel it for that or any other reason. But that is the nitty-gritty of the rule. And Jason, did any other questions pop up during that reading of those definitions?
Not specifically for that definition. And just as a reminder to everyone, you can use the questions panel here in your GoToWebinar console to ask questions. And then we've got some specific scenarios here that I think, we'll mention. I think at the end, we've got contact information that you have up on the last slide. I think a more in-depth discussion may be the better route than trying to suss it out over the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, a lot of our clients find that what they really need is a one-on-one strategy session to look at all their options and figure out what's the best to meet their short-term and long-term goals. But I do want to run through one other additional green card option for startup founders before we wrap up, and that is what I call the startup green card, and this is also called the EB2 green card with a national interest waiver. So this is an employment-based green card that you can sponsor yourself for, either as somebody holding an advanced degree or somebody with extraordinary ability. There are long wait times for this category if you are from India or China. But it's a great option for startup founders because you get to skip the entire process called PERM, a labor certification, which is typically to get an employment-based green card, the company has to try to hire Americans before they can offer the job to you as a foreigner. And it's very difficult to go through that process, if not impossible, if you're the owner of the company. So there was a new case in December that came down from the former administration, basically, that expanded the definition of what it means for somebody's work to be in the national interest, to apply it to people who are successful at entrepreneurialism. So to get this special type of green card, you have to show that your work has substantial merit and is of national importance. You have to show that you are well positioned to advance these efforts. You have to show that it's beneficial to the United States in terms of advancement of knowledge or creation of jobs or efficiencies or new products that will help save American lives. There's a lot of ways to argue it, but this is a wonderful green card option that I want more people to know about, because I think people typically consider the EB1A green card for extraordinary ability. And that's very daunting because you have to show that you meet 3 out of these 10 criteria, and like Nobel Prize winners get this type of green card. But if you're a successful entrepreneur of a startup, you could get this other startup green card as well. So that could be the second step after you get the international entrepreneur parole, to then later have this green card route. So, okay. So I know this is a lot of information. There's so much to share. We've barely scratched the tip of the iceberg, and I also understand that it's probably information overload, and you may be feeling kind of overwhelmed and like, do I qualify? I don't know. How do I navigate this? Do I do this? Do I try something else? What's the best option for me? So, you know, a lot of people find that after they talk to our team and have an intake conversation and then sign up for a strategy session, it's so much easier to know where you are and where you want to go and how you want to get there. So, so that is something that we're providing so that you can break through these barriers and borders to up level to the next thing for you. And, you know, our team, we really pride ourselves on thinking creatively, using all of the legal options available to help people. We really value the work that all of you startup founders are doing. Your innovation and ideas really inspire us, and we know all the ins and outs and have seen lots of complicated and crazy variations, probably more complicated than your own situation, so we can be your guide for that. So if you want more information, here is what you need to do. You need to send an email right now to info@alcornimmigrationlaw.com, info@alcornimmigrationlaw.com. And we need to know your name, your phone number, and your question. And or topic. It can be short. We don't need a whole big explanation, but if you have time and you'd like to do that, you're welcome to provide that as well. And so once you do that, a member of my staff will be reaching out to you, and I'm normally very, very booked, but if you respond today, I have reserved 5 time slots tomorrow for consultations, where I can speak with people who have attended the webinar. So when you contact us, you also need to let us know that you participated in the Early Growth Financial Services webinar. And the first part is that one of my staff members will be asking you some questions and getting a little bit more information through a phone call to know where you're coming from and what your status has been up to this point. And that'll help really narrow and focus our conversation so we can spend it on the things that are actually most important, which is figuring out your immigration strategy. And I have a high hourly rate, but we have a special promotion for new potential clients, which would be a 30-minute consultation for $100. And our clients have found that it's the amount of information and value that they get from that is very high. And we can go through all of your options, figure out the best path for you, and also go through any pricing questions for our various package levels that you might have. So that is it. Super fun to share this information with you about international entrepreneur parole and the new options for startup founders. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about each of you and getting to know you and having a conversation with you and figuring out how we can move forward together. So Jason and Early Growth Financial Services, thank you again so much for this opportunity. And we're really looking forward to hearing from each of you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sophie. Again, if we didn't get to your questions today, contact information is right there on the screen. And for those of you who need some serious consultation, I encourage you to jump on that offer as quickly as possible. Sophie, thank you again for joining us. As a reminder to everyone, there will be a recording made available within 48 hours, emailed to you directly, or you can find it on our YouTube channel, our username, Early Growth. So to everyone out there, Sophie, have a great afternoon, great rest of the week, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.